Hi guys and welcome to my latest video. Now what I have here today is a Hegel H90 integrated amp. And if you're wondering why am I reviewing H90 because that's not the newest product, well, because I'm not the big media outlet. I don't get free review samples of expensive gear. But I was curious to try a Hegel, or I don't know how you pronounce it in your country, amplifier, because they were so praised these few last year in these big media outlets. I read and viewed so many great reviews. I always wanted to try one in my system, but they're kinda expensive. But I got a sweet deal on this second-hand, it's about 4 years old H90, and I think actually this is a good time to make a review of this unit because H95 was released just last year. It's a new product, but this one can still be found in many countries on a really nice discount. But also you can just buy it second-hand as I did. It's still a pretty new product, 3-4 years old. So let's see what it's all about. Okay, so first let's get few things straight. This is an integrated amplifier, but it also contains a digital section, meaning it has integrated DAC inside. And that basically immediately leads me to its connectivity. So let me just quickly turn it around. It's a little bit heavy. Okay, so here in the back, as every other integrated amplifier, you see speaker binding posts. These look sturdy and of a decent quality. Then we have two analog inputs, RCA single-ended. There are no balanced inputs here, no XLR. Then we have one analog output, which is variable, which is basically a pre-out. So you can use this one as a preamp if you want to. But this part of the unit is more interesting because we have a lot of digital connections here. Coaxial SPDIF, then 3 optical inputs, then USB input, and then something which is not that usual, it's Ethernet port. And as you can imagine, because we have that Ethernet port, there is also a streamer on board in this Hegel amp. And it can work with AirPlay, it can work as UPnP and DLNA device. I don't really own any Apple products and I never tried AirPlay capability, but I tested it as a UPnP streamer, and I'll talk about that later in the sound quality section. But for now, all you need to know is that this is a quite versatile amplifier. You have 2 sets of analog inputs, you have a lot of digital inputs if you want to use its internal digital section. About its quality, I'll talk about a little bit later. But just before doing that, let me quickly show you some features, and for that I'll have to turn it on. First thing is that the power switch, physical power switch, is not on the back, but it's actually hidden here in the front. Okay, now in my opinion that's a neat feature because you have it right there if you need it, it's easy to access, but then again it keeps the front panel very simple, clean and stylish. Okay, that's personal taste already, but I kinda like it. As you can see, there's like a huge OLED display, it's big, it's readable, and 2 dials, 2 knobs basically. A left one is for selecting source, while the right one is for changing volume. And of course you can do all of that with its remote control. Now it's quite small, it's made of plastic, it's nothing premium really, but it's functional. It has everything you need, you can mute it, you can send it to standby, change inputs of course, it's just functional. When I'm mentioning plastic remote, that actually leads me to build quality of the unit itself. It's quite decent, it feels sturdy enough. But then again, there is no any luxury feel. The front panel is again made of plastic. It's made, it looks nice, but it's not aluminum. The rest of the casing is some sort of metal. So everything really looks quite okay. It's functional, it looks like it's built to last, but there's nothing prestigious about materials or anything when you actually touch it and feel it. It's just a normal integrated amplifier. Now, I don't want to talk much about specs or technologies that were used to create this amp. You can read that basically anywhere, and most of that is just, I don't know, manufacturers bragging about some sort of revolutionary circuitry and things like that. Instead, I'll quickly tell you that this amp is rated at 60 watts into 8 ohms load, which doesn't sound like much, but the manufacturer claims that it will drive down to 2 ohms loads, which is something that sounds promising, because 2 ohms, when it comes to speakers, it's very demanding load. Damping factor is really huge, 2000, that's something that Hegel amps are known for. Now I'm going to move to how it really sounds, and I'm going to start with its analog section. So if I connect any of the external DACs, I'm currently using Denafrips Ares II, and I use this just as a normal integrated amplifier through analog RCA inputs. In that case, what I noticed first is that tonally, this is a very well balanced amp. Nothing really calls for your attention, like, I don't know, prominent bass or prominent mid-range or really bright highs. Everything is quite neatly and nicely balanced. But that said, let me start with the bass line. First thing that I noticed is that it's so well controlled. Now the bass line is deep. It can go deep, it can sound powerful, but it's always really well controlled and it always sounds really neat. But some of you might feel one thing is lacking a little bit, and that's some sort of punch and slam. Just for example, in several occasions with amps of similar price range, I heard that kind of slam coming from name amps. And to some extent, even my own Cyrus 8VS2 that I used up until recently can get you a little bit more of that punch, of that slam, of that forward party-going character. And Hegel is not like that. As I said, the bass line is deep, is powerful, is well controlled, but there is not much slam in it. Personally, I don't mind that, but I'm just saying that you should know about it. And when it comes to mid-range, it's, I don't know what to say, actually, it's very neutral. If there is a chesty vocal or full-bodied instrument, it will really sound chesty and full-bodied. If there is a husky vocal or thin recording, like older 70s, 80s recordings, it will sound like that. So I don't really feel that this amp adds much to the sound. It doesn't add much of its own color. It's quite neutral, and I feel that it tries to convey the real tonality of the recording. And the highest region continues in the same fashion. It's again very detailed. It can be analytical. It can be even harsh if a recording is like that, but I don't feel that's the character of the amp. But I really feel that everything is in nice balance. There is enough liquidity to the tone. There is enough bite to the tone. I don't really like using word neutral, but I feel that Hegel is doing it. It sounded quite neutral. But I want to move away from the tonality, because that's not the thing that you notice first about this amplifier. So what actually struck me the most when I started listening this amp is how dark background is. Compared to my previous amp and most other amps that I've tested in my own system, background is simply darker. And every tone feels like emerging from that darkness. And there's a great amount of space around each tone. And as you would expect, because of that, there is a really great sound staging. There is a really nice depth and width, and each tone, each instrument and vocal, they have their separate spaces. You feel they're surrounded with enough of empty air before the next instrument begins. And that's something that's so pronounced that it took me some time to actually adjust to it. For example, my old Cyrus amp, it has that sort of light thrown at everything, and something that creates an atmosphere that holds the whole stage as a glue. Like some sort of slight background atmosphere or noise, or however you call it, that you feel that everything is happening inside of the one same atmospheric bubble. And with Hegel, that does not happen. It's so dark that you feel that each instrument is really having its own space. It's impressive, it really is, but it's also something that you might not really like if you're a person that wants your instruments to feel more connected in some way, to have some sort of glue that binds them together. And I'll use the wording that my girlfriend actually used. She was just listening casually from the side, and she said, you know, Cyrus sounds as I am in a jazz club that's smoky and has a lot of dust and smoke in the air, and there's atmosphere that you can feel and almost touch at all times. But with Hegel, I feel like I'm watching an unplugged session with lights turned off, audience is very silent, air is very clean, and I just listen the instruments and the vocals that have lights only on them. But in the end, we actually agreed that we do prefer Hegel because we hear more of micro details, we hear more of tone decay, we hear more of space. Once you get used to that kind of presentation, and then if I go back to my old Cyrus, I realized it's cramping the soundstage a little bit. Yeah, everything feels a little bit better binded together, but it also feels slightly more cramped and less distinctive. So I started missing that thing that Hegel is doing, that it's just projecting instruments so easily, and each and every one of them is having their own space to breathe and a lot of darkness in the background. And because of that, I hear a lot of tiny details, a lot of small echoes, and everything happening in the recording. So to quickly sum it up, how I feel about H90 as an amplifier, I feel it has a great amount of control, starting with a bass line that can go deep, that's firm, that's really well controlled. It lacks a little bit of slam. It lacks a little bit of party character. This is not that amp. If you're after that, probably better look at some other brands. But if you're after control, if you're after being precise, being firm, having great grip over your speakers, then you should definitely hear a Hegel amp. Mid-range again is great. I feel it's tonally correct. There's a lot of tone timbre when you need it. There's precision and clean and crisp edges when you need those too. Finally, spatially, it creates a really great sound stage. It's not too forward. It's not the kind of amp that will throw vocals and drums and things at you in an exciting way. But instead, it will arrange all of the instruments, vocals, every tone into a believable and spacious soundstage that will stay composed, calm, and just well arranged no matter what you're playing. And I really like that. But now let's talk about the digital part of the story. Well, first I connected my Raspberry Pi streamer with audiophile board using coaxial SPDIF to the coaxial input of H90, and I started listening, and it sounded really good. Now, it can't fully compete with RS Denafrips 2 that I'm using normally in my system, and compared to it, soundstage shrinked a little bit, it became a little bit more congested, bass line started to sound a little bit more bloated and closed, but all in all it was still a very good sound quality. And I quickly went through a lot of DACs that I had at home, and what I concluded by doing that is that internal DA section is definitely better than current entry-level DAC offering. In my opinion, it's better than, let's say, Topping E30, but it's not better than SMSL SU9, for example. They're roughly similar. There are, of course, some slight tonal differences and such, but in terms of quality, in terms of fidelity, I feel that integrated digital section here is roughly on the level with a really decent, like $400 DAC. And that's actually commendable. That's something that's really praiseworthy, because if you consider that you're buying an integrated amplifier and most of them don't even have DA section, this is great. It's not just an afterthought. It's not just something that you'll use only until you saved money for the cheapest possible DAC. No, it's actually very decent. It's very usable. And if you want to surpass it, you have to think like at least Denafrips Ares II or something at the similar level. That said, I then tried optical inputs, I binged some Netflix, it sounded great, USB connected to my laptop. It's again really usable, really good. And lastly, I was curious about its network capabilities, about its streaming capabilities. So I just took my Ethernet cable, hooked it up directly to the H90, and then H90 detects the network, it presents itself as a DLNA-capable device, my PC saw it, and I could also see H90 as a renderer in my mConnect app. That's the app on my Android phone that I'm regularly using to stream music to my Raspberry Pi streamer. And next to Raspberry Pi, there was just added in the list Hegel H90. I just chose that as a renderer output and started streaming some music using both Tidal and Qobuz. And let me tell you this, for some reason, when you use it as a streamer, it actually sounds better than when I use my Raspberry Pi and audiophile connected to its coaxial input. Like that synergy of its internal streamer and its internal DA section work better. So soundstage expanded a little bit, there was definitely more details than over coaxial input, or optical or USB. And at that moment I was quite positively surprised. The sound when you're using internal streamer is maybe a little bit on the brighter side. It's a little bit more forward than when I'm using my own streamer and my own DAC, but it comes damn close to it. And I was started thinking, you cannot put numbers on these things, but I would start to think it's like probably 80% of the quality of my own streamer with linear power supply and my own DAC. And that whole digital source setup costs north of $1,000. And the integrated streaming solution inside of H90 comes quite close to it. And at that moment, to tell you truly, I almost felt bummed out. Why are we spending so much money on clean power supplies, external DACs, and everything, when you can actually buy a really, really good integrated amplifier with such a good integrated streamer and a DAC and everything bundled inside for like $2,000. And in this case, it's just around $1,000 because it's second-handed. But I kept listening to different files, and with Tidal, everything worked just fine. Now, CD quality, standard resolution files worked great. This unit does not support MQA, so you cannot really listen to anything higher than 24 bits, 48 kilohertz using Tidal. So I switched to Qobuz, which I consider to be better sounding service anyway. I prefer it to Tidal in a day-to-day use. I use both, but I prefer Qobuz a little bit. And I started listening again. Now, standard resolution files from Qobuz worked great, but higher resolution files had a problem, because Qobuz does not compress. It doesn't use MQA or any other type of compressing the stream. So if you listen to a 24 bits 96 kilohertz or 192 kilohertz file, it's a really high bitrate file. And with those files, I experienced some sort of hiccups and choppy reproduction. And no matter what I did, I couldn't make H90 work smoothly with high resolution Qobuz files. Now, some of you might say, well, it might be that your internet connection is slow, but just in the last several weeks, I tested several different streamers at my home. I always listened to high-res Qobuz. I never had any problems. Then I switched back to my standard Raspberry Pi streamer, and I again didn't have any problems. So I can only conclude that there's some glitchy buffering issue or something that presents itself only with the highest bitrate streaming files. If you're a Tidal user, Spotify user, or any other service, that will not be a problem. But for Qobuz, that serve really high-resolution files without any sort of compression, it seems like it is. And basically, that's the only shortcoming that I can think of when I'm talking about H90. So to try and sum things up, I think H90 is a really great integrated amplifier. And I believe that even without this whole digital section, it would still be worth its asking price. But with this digital section that's really neat, useful, and of a really high quality, if you plan to use it, then I cannot say it's a bargain, but it's a really great deal. I started thinking, and I couldn't think of any combination of just plain amp and then external DAC, and then external streamer, and then cables to connect all of that together that would cost as much as H90. I couldn't think of any separates for the same price that would match its sound quality, let alone surpass it. And just to put my money where my mouth is, I'll tell you this. This unit was actually loaned to me by a friend that upgraded to H190. It's like 2 classes higher ranked amp in a Hegel line. And he told me, before I sell this one, if you want, you can try it out. You can do a review. I said, okay, yeah, please, thank you. I took it for a listen for a few days to make a review, but only after a day or two, when I actually switched back to my old Cyrus amp, I didn't want to return the Hegel back to my friend, and I just texted him it's old. And I am using it just as an integrated amplifier. My own DAC and streamer and everything, in my opinion, sounds better than its internal digital section, but I'm still keeping it and I'm still a happy second-hand customer because of its great analog section. I now know that this hype surrounding Hegel products is not, it's not just marketing BS. It's not just that those are all bought reviews. These are really high quality amps, and just have that in mind. Go back and think about sound quality part and the character that I explained about bassline, about space, about how it recreates space. If it feels like that's something that you would like, it's a great amp, especially now when you can find one for a really decent price. I checked, and in many countries new ones are still selling, but they're on sale because H95 is the newer one. Also second-hand one. Great amp for a really great price. Now I would like to try the new one, also H95, but I don't have the budget for that right now. I heard that its digital section on the new one, H95, is improved quite a bit, but its analog section, actual amplification section, is pretty much the same. But I was thinking, if that's the case, if that's true, H95 probably pays for people who plan to use digital section heavily. For people who, like me, basically only plan to use analog inputs, H90 is probably a great deal at the moment. And that would be all for today. Now, if you liked the video, please click that button, consider subscribing. Also, if you really appreciate the work I'm doing here in these honest, unbiased reviews, consider becoming a patron maybe. And that's all. Until next time. See you.